Welcome to At the Podium with Patrick Huey and Corinne Bowen today. This is probably the first time that At the Podium has started with another host introducing the podcast. So welcome, Patrick.
Thank you. It's really bizarre to hear you say that and not be saying it myself.
I know, it's kind of fun. I'm really excited to be here with you today. I have been here with you from the beginning, developing the show, brainstorming the episodes, being there behind the scenes, and helping get the podcast off the ground from a technical perspective. And
Yes.
Today we get to take a look back on 34 episodes of At the Podium.
I can't even believe we've done 34. That's like mind-blowing to me.
It really is. It really is. And I thought it would be fun to begin by talking about the making of At the Podium, because it's always fun to see a little bit of the behind the scenes.
Yeah.
And I'm curious because you are someone who loves to get into the nitty-gritty of things. You love the editing part and, researching and all of those things that go into putting the podcast together. What really stands out to you when you think back at the show coming together over these months?
I mean, there's a lot that I think about. I think the process really evolved over the past 34 episodes. I mean, when we first started, it was more really just, we didn't know what we were really doing, or I didn't know what I was really doing. So I think it really was more in the beginning, just me sitting and talking to people that I knew, that I had a close relationship with, because it would make the conversation much more fluid and easier. But as we got deeper into it, I started doing more research on the people. I would read their book, or if they had a movie, I'd watch a couple of their movies. If they had a television series, I would watch episodes of the television series so that I could really talk in depth with them about their work and what they were producing. I think that made the interviews a little bit more rich, a little bit more personal to those people in a much more specific kind of way. And then I think as we got further into it, in the beginning, you guys edited everything. And then I realized, I could probably edit these and shape the story a little bit more in terms of what I heard when I was listening to them talk. So I think as I took on more of the editing, that was really an eye-opening experience to do that, to really sort of begin to craft a narrative, to craft a story around who these people were and what they were really trying to say. And then I think about the production, it's funny. We don't do them live. We record everything, but we approach it like it's live. So unless there's a real big train wreck, and I think that's only happened a couple of times, we don't stop. Even if I just cut out the pauses or the breakup, we keep moving, because it's hard to go back and manufacture a moment. That was an interesting part of the production process. And then I would say for every episode that we've done, for me in terms of time put into that each episode, it's probably 8 hours per episode, if I'm being totally frank.
Yeah, it's amazing everything that comes into play when those episodes are coming together. And I would say, because oftentimes I would be, myself and Marianne would be behind the scenes. We would be there. We would be listening and watching as the interviews were unfolding, and just there to support and, tell you guys if the sound was off or whatever. But it was just really amazing to witness the unfolding of each conversation. And one thing that I noticed, almost all of the guests say during the interviews was, wow, no one's ever asked me that question before.
I really prepare for people. So I really do the work so that when I'm talking to them, and they may just say something that's a little, we should say that we send the questions in advance, so people know what's coming. There's no surprise. There's no gotcha moment. That doesn't happen. But the script that we send is just a framework. And so I think that puts them at ease.
Yes.
And they start to talk. So if I'm listening and I hear something, sometimes it's just going back and sort of clarifying what they've said, or letting whatever they've sort of naturally brought up lead us down another path, which is fine. But that may be where that question that no one's ever asked them comes from.
You're a storyteller. I think you see, as you research, from where I'm sitting, what I'm seeing is that you start to see patterns and themes and other things emerge that you kind of draw out of them through questions during the interview. And then they have these little aha moments, which is really beautiful to witness them experiencing in the moment.
I think it comes from trust.
Yeah.
And I think setting the questions in advance, whether or not they read them, is a message to them that you're going to be treated fairly here.
Yeah, definitely.
And I think also, and you know, I think also too, and I think I'm talking more now than I did in the beginning of the podcast, just because I'm just more interested in dialoguing with them. But I think when you just kind of sit back and let people talk, they talk about themselves. And so you just create the platform for them to, I don't know if we say it in this season's entrance or in season 2's entrance. I forget, they blend in my head now because we're already shooting season 2. But I talk about it, this platform being a place for people to share. Maybe I say it in season 2. I don't know. But that sort of spirit, they can sort of buy into or dig into.
Well, I think that perfectly segues into the theme and the sort of vision that we had, because season 1 is now ended. We spent a lot of time deciding what season 1 would be, what we wanted to really get to the heart of in season 1, and the message, which really came from getting to know you, Patrick, and the way that you have walked your path, was saying yes. And I'm curious if you could share more about what that means to you and why that's where you wanted to begin at the podium.
Well, I think it's because before we even knew there was going to be an At the Podium, we were discussing sort of what is the overarching theme of my life, if there is such a thing that exists, but sort of how I had moved through all these different sort of iterations of my own personal life. And it was, I think I had just randomly said one day, I said yes to everything. I said yes to everything. Not everything, but I said yes to things that made sense for me, even if it didn't make sense to other people. And I think that was sort of the germ of that concept for the first season. And then I think because I kind of knew who I wanted to talk to in the first season, they were all people who I knew had taken these extraordinary steps in their own lives that were not scripted for them. So I think that was, you know, and you look at someone even like Catherine Hahn, who from the outside seems to have achieved everything that she would want to achieve in life and have the kind of career that people dream about, you know. But even knowing her, you know, there are parts of her, it never comes out like you expect, right? And so you have to be able to say that. And I think, I think guests like Regina Bain and Jane Cho were people who sort of exemplify that. And I knew they were going to be on. So it sort of helped shape the concept of people saying yes. And then that just kind of became organically, I don't know if it was organic, but it was thoughtful, but it grew into a life of its own, as everything does when you create something. There's a thing that you create, and then there's the thing that exists.
I would say also it came from, because we were talking about At the Podium, but also the larger brand of Patrick Huey, and as a writer, as a speaker, as a podcast host. And one thing that I know Mary and I asked you a lot about was your advice for others and what you would tell your younger self, or what you would tell someone coming to you, for advice on their path in life. And again, you would talk about the importance of that leap of faith, of that, when a door opens, stepping through it. And I think that's such a wonderful gift of the season to listeners, is it's that nudge to not only say yes to opportunities that might be at their door right now, but also to be more conscious and aware of, when those doors open, walking through them.
Yeah. I mean, I think that comes from that. I think that came from the sort of business side of my life, where so many people that I would interview or ask me, what should I do? And people just weren't willing to go on the ride that was being presented to them. And I was like, well, you've just stopped all the sort of natural energy that you have when you just don't say yes.
Right. You
And
always
no
tell us. I was just going to say how, because I love our meetings and, all the behind the scenes that goes into creating this. And, we often get off on tangents, but one piece of advice you shared was always say yes to the meeting.
Always say yes to the meeting.
Yeah. And I love that. I absolutely love that. We overthink things sometimes.
We do. I do it too. But I take every meeting. I take every meeting because I'm always curious. I'm like, what is underneath this lid?
Right.
You have to you got to take the meeting. That's like,
and curiosity again comes up. I think that's at the core of what drives you and what drives at the podium, and and what makes the discoveries evolve and come out.
Yeah, and I think that maybe goes. I think the show works to a certain degree because I'm actually genuinely curious about people.
Right.
I really am. I mean, I don't find anybody boring.
Right.
I really don't. The difference for the show is, are they willing to talk about it? I think everyone's interesting, but it's are they willing to come on and do the thing? Because some people aren't, and that's their prerogative.
100%. And I think one way that you do that is, and I find this fascinating too, you always talk to your guests about their early years, about their, growing up. What were those special moments for them? Who were those people who shaped them as human beings? And those are some of the most powerful moments, I think, on the podcast when we hear about those stories. And I'm curious what has come up for you as you've listened to these, individuals share those very personal, special memories with you.
Hey, I'm always surprised that they share stuff so generously about themselves. My mom, who's like a special guest star in all of this.
She really is.
I don't think she likes it, but she's like a special guest star in all this. She always said to me, never be afraid of humble beginnings. And I think that's true. And I think what people's origin stories tell us is that everyone has a humble beginning. Even if you're born to, material wealth or influence or exposure, everybody has to take the first step. And I think what people's origin stories tell us is what that first step felt like, looked like, was for them. And everyone has that.
Yeah.
Everyone has that, Even this podcast has an origin story. And when I look back at the first couple of interviews, I was like, oh my God, I was so green. And so I moved way too much. And it was way too familiar, even though I knew them. You see all you start from where you start.
Right.
And you do the best that you know how to do with the information that you have as you go along each phase each step of the way. So I think the origin story is really interesting. And I also think there's something, you know, maybe it's from my acting days, that there's something that happens to a person when they talk about who they were as children, that I think, you know, even if the story isn't a happy story, and sometimes they're not happy stories for people, it still connects them to who they were.
Mhm.
And I think that's a powerful place for someone to speak from.
And when we hear those stories, I think it's almost like those early stories, they connect us all so much more, I think, than maybe a lot of stories about when we're adults. When we hear those stories about when we're children and, you know, in adolescence, it's like, it just connects us as human beings, which creates this familiarity and trust. And I think maybe that's where some of the trust comes from too, is talking about those times in our lives.
Yeah. And it makes people relatable.
Yes.
Like when we interviewed McCord for his episode, I asked him if he would do it. And he said to me, I don't think I've been successful. He went to the website and he came back to me. It's like, I don't think I'm successful enough. And I was like, that's not what it's about. It's not about
Right.
success. It's about yours. And his story was so powerful. When he
Mm.
told it, I was like, that was a very interesting interview, because that was the first interview that I did where McCord, it was such a serious subject.
Yeah.
And I'm not a psychologist or a psychiatrist or an anthropologist. Um, so I sometimes didn't know what to say or ask him. So I was like, then don't ask him anything. Let him just tell his story and sit back. But it's sort of like that interview. And I remember I sent it to you and Mary after I did it. And I was like, I don't know what this even is that we just did.
Right.
I was very sort of confused by it all. Not because of him, but because it was just a very different
Format.
format. It was a very different conversation. And
Mhm.
it wasn't about his career. It was really about him and like the real struggles that he was having. And that's what's compelling. So it didn't matter what his career title was. And as a matter of fact, I don't think we even referenced it. And I know it's not in his little carousel picture on the website what his job title is, because
Right.
it's so not important to what
Mhm.
he was saying. And I think he understood that.
Yeah.
So you know, those origin stories tie us all together, regardless of how big your title is or
Yes.
money you have or whatever. It doesn't matter.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, One of the themes that came up again and again throughout the season, and probably will come up in season 2, is faith.
Mm-hmm.
And faith in all different ways. For some people, religious faith; for others, a less secular faith, you know, just a faith in something more.
Yeah.
Why do you think, did you expect it to come up so often? And what are your reflections on that?
I did not expect it to come up so often. That was a happy accident, I guess you could say. But I think it makes sense. When we started this in 2021, we were sort of deep into the uncertainty of COVID. We had just had the whole nightmare of January 6th when um, those people invaded the Capitol. And I think I think faith and the idea of that there's something bigger happening and the belief in something bigger happening was really appropriate to the time that we were living in.
Right.
Because the world at that point, and it hasn't changed that much, is still so uncertain. But it did surprise me because the people that I talked to are not, people that are necessarily religious people or people who have some kind of religious practice. But I think the people that I've talked to have lived an examined life,
I like
or yeah, or are living examined lives. So when you do that, it makes you ask yourself just the bigger questions,
Yes.
and I think that when you start getting into the bigger questions, I think you start getting into the realm of faith. And and whether and I have intentionally not tried to guide this experience down any particular path, but let it sort of reflect the people that I'm talking to. So I think that not putting it into a specific context for people frees them up to sort of express really what they believe and who they are. But I think the human experience is built on faith. I mean, if you think about it, we're on we're on a ball in space that spins around the sun and turns on its axis every 24 hours and moves around this ball of fire in 365 days a year. And just the act of living under this kind of the circumstances of what is happening right now is an act of faith.
So true. It's so true.
And we don't know.
You just synthesized something for me when it comes to At the Podium, which is, I feel like when you said that they all are living an examined life, like that says it all about these people who you've interviewed. And it makes so much sense that when you are doing that, that the fact that there's something more than, just us comes up quite often.
Yeah. Yeah. People that I've spoken to a person have all lived examined lives.
Yeah.
Because I think, how do you not?
Right. Right.
How do you not examine and think about the choices you've made? What brings you here? Why are you here?
Right. Yeah.
I mean, it's the existential question. Like, why are we here?
Right.
And what are you going to do with the time that you have? And what does it all mean? And,
I would also say a lot of the individuals, whether it was in a traditional way or a non-traditional way, the arts and creativity are part of their lives. And
yes.
And I think that is us creating meaning, like through our stories, through expression, through sports, through whatever it might be, through recovery. Like that is an art too. And another thing that you just said that kind of clicked for me is, and I think it's related to faith in a way, is synchronicities. There were so many synchronicities that came up in these stories. And because he was the last episode 34, Charlie Davies comes up for me. And I mean, I was at the edge of my seat the whole time I was listening to his story unfold. And he touched on every part of what we've just talked about in terms of his origin story and having faith and saying yes at a very young age, and then saying yes again and again and again, and all the synchronicities that he might not have seen right away, but revealed themselves over time. So yeah, and I think, he's very fresh in my mind right now, but again and again, everybody kind of has had their own synchronicities happening as well in their stories.
Yeah, I mean, Charlie is a new friend, I would say. And I kind of knew his story. I didn't know the full extent of his story until I was hearing it. And it's so funny it's so funny now when I talk to people, because now I reach out to them before we record, and I'll say, don't talk about it with me right now. Because I want to start talking. I'm like, oh, don't talk about it, because I wanted to hear it, because I don't want to pretend like I'm hearing it for the first time. I want to really hear it for the first time, like the listener or the watcher, the viewer is. So I didn't know. I knew the basic stuff about his story. I didn't know all the details of his story. And I think, yeah, his story in a way embodies the essence of what the show was about.
For
And I
sure.
also think too, in terms of like living a life of artistry, and I think Tembi said this, that, a life of artistry isn't, I mean, talk about weird synchronicities. Like Tembi and Toby both were saying the same thing. Toby Poser was saying that she was saying the same thing, is like, life artistry is not about painting or about, being in a play or writing a play or sculpting. It's about how you approach whatever it is that you do with a
Mhm.
sense of artistry. And I think the word artistry is very interesting. It's a very specific word, but there is a definite sense of intention with an artist. It isn't like and you paint, Corinne, so you
Mhm.
know this, that, you know, Da Vinci didn't just paint the Mona Lisa or the Last Supper.
Right.
There were sketches, there were probably paintings that he started and threw away. And I think Will Frears and Glynis talked about this as well, about the idea of drafts. And so the
Mhm.
artistry is the drafting process, I think, and how you move through the drafting process and the trial and error of what you're creating. But it's also, I think we use the word artistry also as the commitment to excellence. That whatever you do it with the commitment to excellence. And then the commitment to excellence is actually a commitment to being authentic.
Yeah. I think you just hit on something right there that is so central to the series, which is that commitment. I think of like work ethic, but it's not just for the sake of doing work. It's because it comes from this place that's at your core.
Yeah.
And I think every single one of the people on At the Podium, they inspired me in that way because of the way that they dedicated themselves to their work.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and maybe that's the reason they're all very successful people.
Right. Right. Yeah. And all in their own ways, at
Mm-hmm.
different paces, in different, coming from different origins, all of that.
Yeah.
But that's a big, I would say, message of the season two, is like that commitment to your craft.
Yeah. Yeah. I didn't even think about that.
Yeah, I think about Skylar, for example. I mean, moving to New York City when he's 14 years old and, away from his family to go to school, like, that's amazing.
Yeah. I'll tell you, Skylar's interview resonated with a lot of people.
Yes.
With a lot of people. And I think there was something just so unpretentious about Skylar, and just so he was in his body, which you would expect from a dancer.
Right.
Yes, but I think there was something about just the sort of the clarity with which he just kind of detailed the story of his life. And he's very young, so he hasn't had, as you get older, you pick up things, and the layers of paint are there, and all those layers of paint aren't there on him yet. So there was something that was a bit unvarnished about his conversation that I think people really Adrian Carter, who did an episode, she listened to his, and she was like, he was such a sweet boy, and she didn't mean that at all condescendingly, but
No.
there was like a really a light and sweetness that
Yeah.
shone through in him
Yes.
that I think people responded to.
I don't think we can talk about work ethic without talking about Shaheen.
Oh my gosh, Shaheen. Can we just talk about how the men all cry on this show?
Oh,
What's that about?
it's amazing.
And even if they don't cry, I hear it, they're about to go in their voice,
Mhm.
and they pull it together. I think the only guy who didn't get totally emotional is probably Seth. But yes, Shaheen is, I feel like, and I say this in the best way, there's so many contradictions about Shaheen.
Yeah. Right.
In the best sense of the word, contradictions, meaning that he's not predictable. And
He's
that
so true to himself.
he's so true to himself. And like, you just, I kept saying, how did you do this? How, like, you land in a country where you don't speak the language fluently, and you make it work. And yeah, it just, wow.
Yeah, it was really, he's another one who just, I felt, Mary would be mad at me if I didn't mention how a lot of times it was just like her and I sitting next to each other, and it was like we needed just like a bowl of popcorn, and it was just like we were getting to just sit there and just eat up these beautiful conversations unfold.
Yeah. I mean, Shaheen is like this muscular guy. He's very like at the gym, and he has like a nice car, like a sports car, but he's like a tender soul. And you wouldn't, if you just looked at him, you would never
right
think that about him. You would probably, which is, our assumptions are just trash.
Really are.
They're just trash. We got to get rid of all those assumptions and let people be who they are. And that's when the beauty of humanity comes through.
And listen to their stories. So another part of At the Podium is the newsletter, which took on a whole life of its own.
Yeah.
Which I'm sure you didn't even expect.
Yeah. It's weird, right?
I mean, every week when we publish the episode, we also send out a newsletter, which everybody should opt in for. It's a whole other dimension of the podcast, which is really, I would tell Patrick, I don't even need to watch the news or read a history book, because we just bring all those things together with heart and story and deliver it to my inbox. But I'm curious, what does that newsletter mean to you, and how did each week's note to your subscribers come to you?
Well, I love the newsletter because I love to write. So I think that's part of it. So you may have to remind me of your question, because I'm going to go off on a tangent. But when I'm actually shooting these podcasts, I miss half of it. When you're the host or when you're producing it, there's other things in your mind. So I miss a lot of what they're saying. And the script helps me because I kind of know where they're going to go and where we're going to go. So it helps keep me on track a little bit. But in the real moment of it, I miss a lot of what they say. I don't hear it fully until I go back to edit it. And I'll be like, wow, they said that. Right. And I say that because the newsletter allows me to be fully present with what I'm writing, because it's just me and a blank Word document on my Mac. I'm not managing other things. So what was your question? I told you I was going to forget it. How do I do it? Okay. So when I listen to each podcast, and I probably listen to each podcast, I'm not kidding, maybe 30 times. I just listen to it over and over again because I'm editing it. Right. And as I listen, I write notes, and I'm writing notes to get quotes for the website, but I end up writing notes because I'm listening. I'm like, oh, that's interesting. I'll take notes. And then I will
wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning.
At 3 o'clock in the morning, I write, 3 o'clock in the morning. Bad. Insomnia all the time. But it doesn't always make sense, but if I get inspired to write it, I'll write it. Mm-hmm. Then I'll start to pull in different things, like the letter I did about Bill Cosby. I think people were very interested in that one too. But that was like 2 weeks after Will Smith had slapped Chris Rock, and Whoopi Goldberg had been suspended from The View for the remarks she made about the Holocaust. And Louis C.K. had just won a Grammy after being accused of all of that, sexual harassment of women. Mm-hmm. So I was thinking, well, the comedians are in trouble. And then I thought that it made me just think about Shakespeare and how he used to always use comedians or the clown character in his plays to reflect back as a counterpoint to what's happening, and to sort of speak truth to power. And I'm like, oh, that's the role of what a comedian's supposed to do. And then my thought was, what happens when that goes wrong? And who is the poster child of that going wrong is Bill Cosby. And then it kind of tied into, I knew nothing about Bill Cosby beyond the Cosby Show because I'm a little young for where he would have been really famous. So I researched him and I was like, what an amazing career this man has had, that he threw it all away for this whole thing that he was involved in, and that he threw everything away because he couldn't control these impulses within himself.
Well, I think you synthesize, again, you take history, and one thing that we talk about a lot in our meetings is how history repeats itself.
Yeah.
And that's something that I think you do really well in the newsletters, is you show us how history is repeating itself. And you know, you go back and you research and you bring up these examples that I think, you know, either we are unaware of or we've forgotten about. And it's just, or it's literature, or it's a play or a movie, or like it's a very, like sometimes I'll start it off and I'll think, where is he going with this? And then by the end of it, I'll be like, oh my God, how did he do that? How did he tie all these things together in this really satisfying way? But it's just, it inspires me to learn more about history and to, you know, think more about, you know, the way that the stories that we've created in, you know, reality, and also the stories that have been created on the page, well, all that they have to teach us.
Yeah. And there's nothing new under the sun.
Right.
I mean, so, you know, even if we're looking at something like, this may be a bit esoteric, that's fine.
Okay.
If we look at someone like, we were all like, how did Donald Trump happen?
Right.
Right. Look, if you historically look at, I don't know if I wrote this newsletter, but I've written it. I don't know if I've used it yet, but you know, if you look at someone like John Tyler, who was the 10th president, who joined the Confederacy. You've had really not so great presidents. You look at someone like, you know, someone like Woodrow Wilson, who was probably one of our most racist presidents, you know, so much so that they're renaming buildings that were named after him. And there's a whole relook at his whole legacy, you know, one of our most important presidents. But, you know, Trump didn't come out of just, he's not an aberration. There's a long history of really bad presidents, or presidents who were not, you know, great in terms of race relations, or presidents who were not, you know, living up to the requirements of their constitutional oath to preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution. So that's not unusual, but people don't know history. People don't know.
So true.
They can't contextualize it. Obviously, they didn't have social media in those times, so those types of, you know, and the press oftentimes in these cases were not performing their duty of the fourth estate, where they sort of hold the feet to the fire of these leaders. So those dynamics are at play a little bit, but there's nothing new under the sun. And I love history because I think the answers are there. And I think we have to know history. We have to be well read. You know, it's shocking to me that people don't read or know literature. Again, an examined life, a life, if you know, I don't want to preach, but if people read more and knew their history more, we wouldn't believe in things like QAnon.
Right.
We just wouldn't. There is a legitimate conservative movement that is based in real theory, real analysis, real history. The nonsense we have now is just foolery.
Right.
You know, so it's just because you live an examined life doesn't mean that you're a leftist radical.
Right.
I think William F. Buckley would disagree with that statement. I think George Will, great political conservative thinkers. I think Peggy Noonan, a great conservative writer, have lived examined lives and have read the great authors, and because we've equated examination literature reading with a political philosophy,
right,
which is ridiculous.
Yeah.
So the newsletters to me are my space to just write, and I don't really know how I do it. Is that bad to say? That there's not a formula?
No, it's not bad. I think it's something that just kind of is organic for you. And I think it comes from years of study and reading and being a part of the arts and talking to a lot of people. It's like, I kind of see all of that coming together for you in the newsletter right now.
I love those newsletters.
I know. So to bring it all together, after talking to these 34 phenomenal individuals and moving into season 2, do you feel differently or more strongly about the way that you're seeing the world right now, the way that you have your own outlook for the future? How has At the Podium and this experience that you've had with these people changed you?
Man, that's a hard question. How's it changed me? We're creating something. I think the book is still being written. I'm just living the process. In a way, I'm just doing what feels right.
It's given me a lot of hope, just in the power that we have to inspire each other. Just like, it's amazing how, just coming together with another human being and sharing your story can transform you. It can completely transform your outlook. It can spark new ideas. It can be exactly what you need to hear in order to make that next step in your life. And it's like nothing has physically happened. You've just witnessed someone's story unfold, but it's that power of story that is ancient, but it's so real, and it continues to be exactly what we need.
Yeah, and Toby said that. Toby said, we got here today because of the stories we told ourselves. What we're doing here is bearing witness for these people. And I think to bear witness to someone's life, to bear witness to someone's experience is really, there's not a greater gift that you can give someone, because it acknowledges their existence. It validates their existence. And right now we don't bear witness to each other's lives. We don't bear witness to each other's struggles. We're not in a moment where that's happening. And I think what makes the show unique for people is that we bear witness to people, and we bear witness to their story.
Right. It creates empathy. And it, like, sometimes it was the smallest moments that would make my heart break. I remember Gamal talking about growing up, I think in Philadelphia.
Mm-hmm.
And he talked about his neighbor who when he was a kid, he would, sit out on the porch with him, and he would talk and talk and talk and talk and talk with him. And just how special that person was to him. And like, I felt connected to him in that moment. Like, I think, with At the Podium, there's so many different people from just every walk of life, every, part of the country, different parts of the world even. And yet when we listen to each other's stories, we just feel like human with them.
That human experience, we're all in it together. And I think that's what these 34 people have shown us, is that the struggle, even if you had a great relationship with your father, and Charlie talks about the complex relationship he had with his father, you understand that.
Right.
You understand you may not understand it in the terms that he's talking about it, but you understand at the core of, we've all had complex relationships with people who matter in our lives. Mm-hmm. So when he talks about that, it transcends the thing that he's talking about.
Right.
When Lucia, most people have never struggled with their race or their identity, but when Lucia talks about that, we all have had things in our lives that we struggle with. So she's talking about her identity struggle, but you can easily relate that to areas of your life where you struggle. Mm-hmm. So that these are the connection points. These are the points where we start to connect as people with each other. This is why we got to talk.
This is why we've got to talk. Exactly. And I think bringing it all back to the saying yes, when we hear people's stories and we realize, you know, a lot of times we meet people and we see them at the pinnacle, you know, we're seeing them and, you know, when they've already said the yes and they've done the things and they've, you know, and when we hear their stories and how they got there, I think it makes it all click in terms of like, oh, it wasn't easy.
Mm-mm.
You know, I think a lot of times we assume like, oh, it was easy for them, you know, or whatever. And when we feel connected and we can relate to those people, it's like, oh, maybe I can say yes too. You know, it makes it more whatever your yes might be. You know, it's like you've learned about their story and you've seen a part of yourself in it. And it's like, okay, maybe I can do that too.
Bill Thompson from Young Storytellers, he talks about telling story is power. And if you tell your story, you can change behavior.
Mm,
And I think that is the answer to the Marjorie Taylor Greens and the Ted Cruzes of the world.
yeah.
People who would seek to destroy what has come before them in the name of vanity or power or wealth. And that destructive force doesn't have a foothold if we, as responsible people, key into the things that connect us to the 70 or 80 years of human experience that we have on this planet together. So if we don't like where that's going, the people who have the power to change it, it's us. And we change it through story and through narrative. And we change it through taking the moment to see another person as a three-dimensional creation with a heart and a soul and a being and wants and desires and needs. And the more that we can do that, the more that we counteract the nonsense of what's happening right now. And that to me is what saying yes and being at the podium and all that's about, is how do we stop, diminish the foolery, the nonsense that is literally destroying the planet and us on the planet right now.
That moves us into season 2 perfectly, because season 2 is all about voice. Can you share a bit about what is in store for us in terms of the vision for season 2?
So season 2 is, we're still saying yes.
Still saying yes.
Still saying yes, but it's about people who are using their voice to uplift their community or the world. The character of the season is still emerging, I think. And the conversations sometimes are not as personal, but it always comes up. It always comes up.
Yeah.
But it's not the leading force sometimes in the conversations. But I think we all have a platform. So what do you want to say with it? What do you want to do with that platform? And how are you using your platform, your voice, to make the world a better place? I mean, that's kind of where it is. It'll probably keep evolving from there.
And how did they find it, right? How did they find it?
How'd you get there?
Right. Which is ever evolving. But I think that's such an important part of your conversations, because I think that's a question that many of us have is, and a lot of it has to do with integrity, and a lot of it has to do with, connecting in with that. And I'm fascinated, to see how each of these people got to a place where, their voices now and will grow and change, I'm sure. But, I think we yearn for that. We yearn to find a voice that feels very connected into who we are and what we believe in.
Yeah, I think so. And it's, I'm interested to see who else shows up with their voice, with their story, and how because every person that we've interviewed so far is so different. And their stories are so still inspiring.
Yes, very powerful. Well, thank you so much, Patrick. This was so much fun.
I know, I haven't had this setup really like this. So this is, I feel like,
this
wow.
is new.
This is new. Really new.
The first.
Yes. But I'm so grateful to you and to Marianne, because it takes a village.
Yes. And it's been such a joy and such an adventure. And we're so grateful to be a part of it.
Yes, I'm grateful you're there. It's going to be a good second season.
Thank you. All right. Do you want to close it out with your...
Oh, yes. To those of you who are watching or listening, we all have a voice. Use yours wisely. Bye, everyone.